I suppose the narrative was always that
1, 2. So, first of all, let me say, welcome to the beer bar, which I'm hoping you've probably heard before, or if you haven't, you will. Again, next time you come in, because the lads really know that. So tonight, here at the beer bar, and I'll probably just start off having a few words of my own, simply because if you put a microphone in my hand, I do that. So the beer bar has been open since the 1st of March, and we are a bar dedicated to independent breweries. We have 42 taps, none of them contracted, none of them ever will be. So what we're really about is all the great and creative beer and all the amazing stuff that independent breweries around Australia are doing. And we also have, for those unusual people who don't like beer, we actually have 7 wines and 7 spirits, all made in Australia by independent vineyards, independent distillers. So that's really what we're about, is about great beer served well, creating a space for people to come to and enjoy that socially, personally. I think that between poker machines and contracted taps and shit beer, it's largely killed a lot of the pub scene in Sydney, and I've seen that over many years. So the 3 years I spent in the US let me see what can happen in the craft beer scene when people get into it, support it, and like good beer. So on that note, well, actually, since I've got a microphone in my hand, let me thank some of the people who made it possible to open this space. First of all, my wife, who is the creative. She does the music and art in the family, and she is responsible for the murals, which she is still working on number 3, but we're getting there. The other thing is that allows it to happen is great staff, and we've got Clem and Ben, the beer bar men, and we've got Cormac, our Irish guest, who has also approved the latest Irish dry stout we've put on tap. So we test everything that goes on tap and make sure that we think it's fit to drink, and we hope you like it. And if you've got suggestions, and we want input from our regulars and from people who come and visit us. But what's special about tonight, before we get to the drag queen trivia, we have another guest who is not in drag tonight. But if he decides to come in drag sometime in the future, we'll look forward to that as well. I would like to welcome, first of all, I'd like to thank Michael and the whole Hawkers team for being our Brewery Mate of the Month for May, which means that you're drinking half-price Hawkers beer at the moment. Don't get used to that, it's really good stuff and expensive. But the first 5 taps for this month are dedicated to Hawkers. So for this couple of hours, all Hawkers beers, no matter the size or flavour, are at half price. If you're silly enough to have a go at that barrel aged, I said to the boys, yes, we'll even do the barley wine at half price for this 2 hours. But be very careful, it should come with a warning on it. At 12%, but delightful. But for the whole month of May, you can get 2-for-1 tasting paddles of the Hawkers beers. Hawkers is a brewery that have passed the taste test around the country. They deserve the reputation they have. They make some amazing things. They do some crazy things. We like a little bit of crazy. Yuzu and plum sour, that's a little bit of crazy right there. But I think behind all the crazy, there's also some amazing corporate management, corporate vision, and that's provided by Mazen Hajjar, who, on his way to Gabs, has been good enough to drop in, maybe tell us a story or two, maybe tell us where things are going, where things have been, what's happening. So handing over, and thank you very much for taking the time to come and join us again.
Thanks, guys, for having me. So, I would love for this to be as interactive as possible. So if anyone wants to scream any questions at me or any comments at me or anything like that, please do. I hate holding a microphone and just blurting crap out at people. So as much as you want to be interactive, please let me know. So my name is Mazen Hajjar. My background is I started my beer career in 2006. I started the first craft brewery in the Middle East when the war between Israel and Hizbollah was going on. I started making beer in Lebanon while the bombs were falling. And that was the first craft brewery in the Middle East. And from there, I was lucky enough, we started a bar where the CNN crew used to hang around. And one day, the CNN guy asked me a few questions and said, "Do you mind if we interview you? This sounds like a completely crazy story." It aired 56 times, and as you know, us Lebanese, we like to get around the world. There's 18 million Lebanese outside of Lebanon and 4 million in Lebanon. I think quite a few of them are actually in Sydney, if I could say so myself. And when the Lebanese got hold of this craft brewery in the Middle East, it kind of went global. And by year 8 of starting 961 Beer, we were exporting to 26 different countries. And Tony's brother and I, Tony, who's our national sales manager, his brother used to distribute 961 Beer in Australia. And one day we were in Sydney. As a typical Melbourneite, he was confused as to how you guys can organize your streets and find your way around. And he didn't know anyone really in town, and so I suggested that we just put beers in a bag, knock on doors and say hello. And he said, we had gone back to our roots. And it turns out the original Lebanese who immigrated into Australia in the 1800s were hawkers. I had never heard that expression. And later on in the conversation, he said, what would happen if there was another war in the Middle East? How can we ensure the supply of beer? And I said, we can brew it here. And sure enough, maybe 3 years later, we set up shop in Melbourne. That was 8 years ago. Is it right? Tony, is it 8 years ago now or 7? 7 years ago, sorry. 7 years ago. So we set up shop in a dodgy area called Reservoir back then. And I remember the reaction of people when we set it up. Everyone was like, what the hell are you doing? It's not very different to Beirut. Now Reservoir is kind of where the hipster community suddenly moved as they have been priced out of the center of the city. We've been doing beers for 7 years now. We do quite a reasonable range of beers all the time. We started off with a pale ale and a pilsner and an IPA, not groundbreaking, and we still do those beers to this very day. But we also have a lot of fun in what we do. What we have today on tap is probably a few of my favorites. So we have a lager. We've got our hazy pale, which is my new drinking session beer. We have the West Coast IPA, which is a very dear beer to my heart. I think it's one of my favorite beers. Even if I wasn't a Hawker's guy, I'd be drinking it every day. We've got the yuzu and plum, and we've got a stout, and we've got the barley one from 2012. 2012. Yeah, 2022. And I don't know if you guys have had any of our beers before, but we do a lot of barrel-aged beers. And if you guys are in Gabs tomorrow, we're going to be releasing a few of those beers as a sneak preview. So drop by the stand, harass Michael or Tony, and we'll get you some samples there. Have I lost you there? Have I lost everyone, or should I get into the geeky world? Or tell you more about the story of being bombed and creating a beer with za'atar? Choice. Geeky or za'atar with bombs? Za'atar with bombs, oh my God. So 2006, after the CNN article, somehow the whole press got hold of 961 Beer. And we decided to do something more ethnic and more authentic historically. So I brewed a beer with za'atar, sumac, anise, chamomile, sage, and mint, and called it Lebanese Pale Ale. When I showed up to Australia, everyone was like, it tasted like shapes. I don't know if any of you guys have ever had it. But it became this big iconic beer, which got us into a lot of restaurants back then. And then I brewed a beer with coffee and cardamom, which is it was an imperial stout, and that's how we have our coffee in Lebanon. Back in 2006, no one was doing this kind of crazy stuff. So when we came to Melbourne, there was a clear separation of what we wanted to do and what we were not going to do. And what we were not going to do was play on the ethnic roots. We wanted to be a strictly Australian brewery. So very slowly it caught up with us again, some of those ethnic stuff. So we've done a baklava brown ale and a knefe stout and a lot of those things. When we started Hawkers, there were 4 of us. And if we had brewed to capacity, we would have been able to produce 600,000 liters a year. We were brewing 2 to 3 times a week, and our poor head brewer was flogged to death because that was basically us working the back line and doing everything. We now have 50 people working for us, and this year we'll brew somewhere between 4 to 4.5 million liters. So the company has grown quite a bit. With no more investment, it's still the same 7 people who started the company with the original investment capital that we put in, which wasn't very much. But it's grown with a lot of passion and a lot of dedication from the team. And today, the guys know way more about the beer industry than I do, and luckily I can walk around and talk on microphones while there's a whole bunch of really great guys in the background making beer and selling beer and organizing all these events. So I'm very lucky in the sense that we have a really amazing team behind it. Being known as the crazy, originally Muslim Lebanese who started the first craft brewery in the Middle East was quite interesting when you're trying to sell beer around the world, because it can be a very positive thing, but it can also bring up a lot of stereotypes. But I think with time, that's changed a lot. And I'm very lucky. I consider myself Australian now. I've been Australian since January 2020. Was it 20? Just before lockdown. By the way, I want my money back. You all said the bloody passport is great. I get the passport 2 months later, I'm not allowed to fucking leave my house for more than 5 kilometers. Excuse me, I want my money back here. Anyway, I consider myself a very proud Australian and a very proud Melbourneite. Sorry, Sydney, I like you, but not that much. Not compared to Melbourne. I love Sydney, but not compared to Melbourne. I shouldn't. The Hawkers started in Sydney, and the idea for Hawkers started in Sydney. But it's been amazing working and living in Australia, because the beer community in Australia, I think, has been super supportive and super welcoming, and that's something that I wasn't really expecting. Contrary to when I was selling beer around the world, this has been genuinely a very supportive community around here, and I'm very glad to see over the last 7 years of working in Australia on beer that how the general beer industry has progressed and how the beer community has progressed. So thank you for coming out, thank you for the support. I'm not going to bore you with any more of my stories, but I'll be over here if anyone wants to have a chat and have a beer, and I might even tell you some more stories if you're still interested. Thanks.
It's fantastic. Whether it's enough or it's not enough, we will find out. We'll see how many people queue up to listen to your stories. But I mean, great stories. Yeah, no, I was sentenced to Melbourne for 2 years and I was hardly able to get out of it, and I still hold some resentment for Melbourneites trying to convince the rest of us that AFL is a serious sport. But that's my problem. You have no idea. Yeah, we're apolitical here. We're going to serve Bloody Marys the day after the election. We don't give a shit. So any quick questions, just generally, from Mazen, before we let him go and have a beer and then take general.
What made you get into barrel aging beer specifically, and were there any challenges associated with getting into that side of brewing?
So the question was what made us get into barrel aged beers. When I started 961 Beer, I had never been to a brewery in my life, and I wasn't a brewer. So my advice to anyone who has a dream of getting into beer, just do it. If I, the idiot, could do it, anyone can. And because I came into beer with no preconceptions of what beer is, I was pushing the envelope of what beer is very early on. So I did a hybrid between beer and wine. In 2007, we fermented grape juice with barley, with malt basically, and made a hybrid between beer and wine and aged it in wine barrels. And of course, as you get more into stouts and more into barley wines, then you're trying to experiment with the crossover into the spirits. And so when I came to Australia, it was the first time that I really had access to barrels, because in Lebanon we don't have a whiskey industry, so it's very expensive to try and bring these things over. Whereas in Australia we have a thriving spirit industry, and when we came in the first year we started operating, we basically put down beers into barrels. Because I really wanted to explore with that. The major difficulty that we get is, back then, the Australian whiskey industry, which is predominantly what we use for much of our barrels, was too small. It was still very young, and so they were still expecting the barrels to be coming out in 10, 12 years. So we had to import a whole bunch of American bourbon and American whiskey and Caribbean rum and all those kinds of barrels. We took the approach with barrels the same way we took the approach with beer, that we wanted to experiment with everything. So we even brought in aquavit barrels. I don't know if you guys have ever drunk aquavit. Aquavit is a Scandinavian schnapps, but rather than made with fruit, it's made with whatever the herb of the day is. And the Norwegians use star anise and caraway seed. And there's a company in Norway called Linje that have been doing this thing for years and years and years. And historically, I think for the last 100 years, they've been buying old sherry Oloroso, 85-year-old sherry Oloroso barrels that hold 500 liters, distilling their aquavit, putting it into the barrel, and then sending the barrel by sea through the equator, through the Panama Canal, to Australia and back to Norway for a 4-month trip, aging the aquavit in the sea, crossing the equator twice, so that the changes in temperature and seasonality, and having the wood and the alcohol move in the wood. We made the beer with those barrels. Actually, we made 3 beers with those barrels. We made a wheat wine, 4 beers. We made a wheat wine, a stout, a double, and a farmhouse ale. We've made beer with cognac, rum, all sorts of barrels. So it's always been an obsession for me to try and push the envelope. And at Hawker's, we made a white stout when white stouts weren't cool. We just released a tropical stout. We brew what we like to drink and what makes sense to us. We don't really chase trends, so we're not really cool kids on the block. So yeah, barrels are a pain in the ass to manage, because you have to source them, and then you sit there and you hope that they're not going to go funky.
Oh, we've got another question.
Anybody? Yes, our fledgling brewer. Yes.
How is the beverage going from like a handful of people to 50 people with like a short amount of time?
With a lot of difficulty. I mean, the labor market in Australia, and that's a very good thing for Australia, it's very fickle, right? Because we have such low unemployment. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but you recruit, and we've always had a training program where we can progress people, and from day one we invested in the education of our staff. So if you came to us, we paid for your degree to get into brewing. We were very happy to invest in IBDs and all sorts of distilling and brewing degrees, and send people to do courses. And I've been brewing since 2006, so I kind of know what the hell I'm doing as well. So we've had a lot of people come through Hawker's, grow in the system, and then end up. So I think we have now 7 or 8, Tony, head brewers in other breweries that were originally Hawker's guys. So the head brewer at Deeds, the head brewer at Brick Lane, the head brewer at Clifton Hill, the head brewer at Coke and Spiriters, all of these guys came from Hawker's originally. So we have this, we train a lot of talent, we invest in people, and all our staff have shares now. So the company is partially employee owned, so that's hopefully why we attract people. People come because we have a nice work environment, we treat people with respect, and we train them up. But you're right, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, it was very difficult to find anyone who knew anything about brewing beer. It's changed a lot now. It's become cool to be a brewer.
Okay, on that note, we'll let Mazen go and sit down and have a beer himself. And if you'd like to go and have a chat with him, he's probably one of the most approachable CEOs that I have met in a long time. And I've met some real assholes, but this guy's really nice. But yeah, go and have a chat. If you've got another question, you were a bit too shy, go and ask. And if not, you'll see him at Gab's for the whole 2 days by the sound of it.
Come bother me.
Yeah, come bother him at Gab's and try some of that white stout, which I'd really like to steal and see if I can nitro that, because that's going to be some fun. Okay, thanks again very much, Master.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Can I get a message?